The sensor screen flickered with impossible data, and Dr. Hallis tapped it 3 times with one of his thin limbs, hoping the equipment had malfunctioned. The numbers remained unchanged. Something was moving on the surface of CR 7719, a planet that should have been completely dead. For 200 years, the Galactic Survey had monitored this world from orbit. Nothing lived down there. Nothing could live down there. The atmosphere was 40% oxygen, thick with sulfur dioxide, and the rain could dissolve most metals within hours. Temperature swings went from boiling hot to freezing cold every few days. Even the rocks seemed angry on that world. "Run the scan again," Hallis said to his research assistant Bree, who was perched on her workstation with feathers ruffled in confusion. Bree's talons clicked across the controls. Her large eyes blinked twice as the results appeared. "Same reading, Doctor. Thermal signature consistent with artificial structure, and there's definitely movement." Station Commander Oren swam closer in his water-filled mobility sphere, his amphibious face pressed against the transparent wall. "Could be equipment failure. Those readings are impossible." "The scanner is fine," Pell said from the security station. "The crustacean officer's many legs work several controls at once. I'm detecting metal alloys. Looks like a crashed vessel, maybe 10 months old based on weathering patterns." Hallis felt his breath quicken. In his 40 years of research, he had never encountered anything like this. The planet below was classified as a Class X Deathworld. Even their research station had to orbit at a safe distance. The acidic clouds alone would eat through most starship hulls in less than a day. "We should report this to headquarters," Oren said. "Always the one to follow procedure." "They'll send a team in 6 months," Bree argued. "Whatever is down there might not last that long." Hallis studied the data again. The structure had clearly been modified since the crash. Someone had built additional framework around it, created what looked like a garden area, and even dug channels for water collection. This wasn't random debris. This was habitation. "We're going down," Hallis decided. Oren's face turned a darker shade of blue. "Doctor, that violates every safety protocol. The environmental suits are rated for 6 hours maximum exposure, and that's being generous." "Then we move fast." Hallis turned to face his team. "If there's any chance someone is alive down there, we have a duty to investigate." The vote was quick. Bree supported the mission immediately. Pell agreed after a moment of thought. Oren objected but was outvoted. Within an hour, they were loading the shuttle with maximum protection gear. Hallis checked his environmental suit 3 times before boarding. The suit was designed by the best engineers in the galaxy, built to withstand extreme conditions, but CR 7719 pushed every limit. The suit's computer voice kept listing warnings as they descended through the toxic atmosphere. Hull temperature rising. Atmospheric acid content dangerous. Oxygen levels hazardous. Recommend immediate retreat. Noted, Pell said dryly, piloting the shuttle through clouds that hissed against the hull. They landed 2 kilometers from the structure. The shuttle's exterior already showed signs of corrosion. Through the window, Hallis could see a landscape that looked like something from a nightmare. Jagged rocks rose from cracked earth. Yellow gas vented from fissures in the ground. The sky was a sick orange color, and rain fell in sheets that steamed when it hit stone. 6 hours, Oren reminded them as they stepped out. Not a minute more. Walking on CR 7719 felt like walking through hatred itself. Every sensor in Hallis's suit screamed warnings. The ground was uneven and sharp. The air shimmered with heat one moment and cold the next. Bree stumbled twice, her lighter frame struggling with the gravity and terrain. After 20 minutes of careful progress, they reached the structure. It was indeed a crashed survey pod, but someone had worked hard to make it livable. Metal panels had been repositioned to create walls. A framework of salvaged equipment held up what looked like a roof. In one area, actual plants were growing, though Hallis couldn't identify the species. "This is sophisticated survival work," Pell observed. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Or got very lucky," Bree added. They approached slowly. Hallis noticed a water collection system that channeled the acidic rain into containers. He saw tools made from broken equipment. Someone had lived here for months, adapting to conditions that should have killed them immediately. Movement came from inside the shelter. The team froze. Hallis raised one hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. His suit's air recycler was working overtime in the toxic atmosphere. They had maybe 5 hours left. The shelter's door, a piece of bent metal pushed open, A figure stepped out into the poisonous air. Hallis's brain refused to process what he was seeing. The figure was humanoid, definitely organic and wearing nothing but torn clothing. No environmental suit, no breathing apparatus, no protection at all. The figure raised a hand in greeting, then spoke in a clear voice that somehow carried through the toxic wind. "Hey there. Wasn't expecting visitors." Bree made a choking sound. "That's a human. And he's breathing the air." Pell's weapons dropped slightly in shock. "That's impossible." Oren stepped forward, his suit's sensors scanning frantically. The atmospheric composition would kill any carbon-based life form in minutes. He should be dead. The human smiled, a strange expression that Hallis had read about but never seen in person. "Yeah, I thought so too when I crashed here 8 months ago. Turns out we're tougher than the databases say." Hallis found his voice. "You've been breathing this atmosphere for 8 months?" "Well, the first 2 days were rough," the human admitted. "Thought I was dying?" "Probably was dying, technically. But then my body figured it out. Now it's not so bad. You get used to it." The human gestured toward his shelter. "Want to come inside? You all look like you're about to fall over, and I've got some collected water if you need it. Fair warning, it tastes a bit sour." "A bit sour," Pell repeated in disbelief. "That rain is concentrated acid." The human shrugged. "Yeah, like I said, it's a bit sour. Kind of like lemonade back on Earth." Hallis realized his team was standing in shocked silence. They had come to investigate an impossible survival situation, and found something far more impossible. A human breathing deadly air, drinking acid rain, and acting like this was all perfectly normal. "I'm David," the human said. "David Cole, cargo technician, or I was before the crash. Sorry about the mess, I wasn't expecting company." Before Hallis could respond, his suit's computer chimed a warning. 5 hours and 30 minutes of safe exposure remaining. They had come looking for wreckage and maybe a body to recover. Instead, they had found a human who had turned a Deathworld into a home. David's shelter was cramped but organized. The crashed survey pod had been gutted and rebuilt from the inside, with every piece of equipment serving multiple purposes. Dr. Hallis had to duck under hanging water containers as he entered, his environmental suit scraping against the low ceiling. "Sorry about the tight fit," David said, moving around the space with easy familiarity. "Wasn't built for guests." Bree's suit sensors were beeping constantly. "How are you still alive?" she blurted out. "This doesn't make sense." David pulled out a worn tablet and handed it to Dr. Hallis. "I kept logs. Figured if I died, someone might find them useful." Hallis scrolled through the entries, his eyes widening with each page. The first week of entries were barely coherent, filled with descriptions of pain and certainty of death. David had crashed with a damaged environmental suit that lasted only 3 hours. He had written his final goodbyes, made peace with dying, and then waited. "The pain was incredible," David said quietly, sitting on a makeshift chair. "My lungs felt like they were on fire. My skin burned. I threw up everything in my stomach and then kept throwing up. Couldn't see straight. Couldn't think. I just lay there waiting to die." "But you didn't die," Pell said, his crustacean eyes fixed on the human. "No. After about 48 hours, things started to change. The burning became tolerable. My breathing evened out. I could open my eyes without them watering." David looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "My body adapted. Oren's suit computer was running continuous scans. Your cellular structure is actively processing the toxins. I've never seen anything like it. You're converting the sulfur compounds into harmless byproducts. Is that what's happening?" David asked with genuine curiosity. "I just know I stopped feeling like death." Dr. Hallis examined the shelter more carefully. In one corner, plants were growing in soil David had somehow made fertile. They were Earth species, probably from the emergency survival kit every pod carried, but they looked different, their leaves thicker and darker than normal. "The plants adapted too," David explained, following Hallis's gaze. "First batch died in 3 days. Second batch lasted a week. Third generation started to thrive. Now they're doing better than I am." "You're farming in acid rain and toxic soil," Bree said in amazement. "The rain isn't that bad once you filter it through rocks," David replied. "And the soil just needed some organic matter. Took a while to build up, but it works." Hallis approached the water collection system. David had created an elaborate series of channels that ran the rain through several stages of natural filtration before collection. It was clever engineering with almost no actual tools. Can I try the water? Hallis asked. I wouldn't recommend it, David said quickly. It's fine for me now, but your species might not handle it well. Pell moved closer to David, his weapons lowered but sensors active. When you crashed, did you have any special medical treatments? Genetic modifications? Military augmentations? I'm a cargo tech, David said with a slight smile. The most dangerous thing I did before this was lift heavy boxes. No modifications, no treatments, just standard human biology. There's nothing standard about this, Oren muttered, his face showing confusion. David stood and walked to his door, pushing it open. The toxic air rushed in, and Hallis's suit immediately began filtering it out. David took a deep breath like someone enjoying a spring morning. You know what I think? David said, looking out at the hostile landscape. I think humans are used to adapting. Earth isn't as gentle as the databases make it sound. We've got deserts where people die from heat, frozen places where the cold kills in minutes, jungles with diseases that can drop you in hours. Humans have lived in all of them. But those are normal planetary conditions, Bree argued. This is extreme by any standard, is it? David turned back to face them. The oxygen here is high, yeah, but humans can adjust to different oxygen levels. The acid is rough, but our bodies can neutralize a lot of chemicals if they have time to adapt. The temperature swings are bad, but we've got good thermal regulation. Put it all together and it's just barely on the edge of survivable. Dr. Hallis realized something profound. You're saying humans evolved to handle extreme variation? We evolved on a planet that kept trying to kill us in new ways, David said. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, droughts, floods. Species that couldn't adapt went extinct. We're what's left. The stubborn ones. A rumbling sound came from outside and the shelter shook slightly. David glanced at the ceiling with practiced calm. Seismic activity? Hallis asked. Every few days, David confirmed. There's a volcanic chain about 20 kilometers west. When it acts up, things get exciting around here. The rumbling grew stronger. Pell checked his equipment. That's not minor activity. That's a major eruption starting. Oren's suit computer flashed red warnings. Commander, we need to return to the shuttle immediately. Volcanic gases will make the atmosphere even more dangerous. Your shuttle won't make it through the eruption cloud, David said calmly. The particulates will shred your hull and the thermal updrafts will tear you apart. What do you suggest? Hallis asked, trusting this human who had survived the impossible. I've got another shelter, a cave system about 3 kilometers from here. It's protected from the eruptions and I've got supplies there. David grabbed a pack from the corner. But we need to move now. The pyroclastic flow will hit this area in about 20 minutes. Our suits won't last long enough, Bree said, her voice tight with fear. David looked at each of them, his expression serious. Then you're going to have to trust me. I've survived 2 of these eruptions already. I know the way, I know the timing, and I know how to keep you alive. Oren started to protest, but another violent shake cut him off. Equipment fell from shelves, and through the door they could see orange light appearing on the horizon. Decision time, Commander, David said. Risk the shuttle and definitely die, or trust the human and maybe live. Your choice. Hallis looked at his team, then at the human who had thrived in hell for 8 months. We follow David. Good choice, David said, shouldering his pack. Stay close, watch where I step, and whatever happens, don't panic. Panic kills faster than the environment. They stepped out into the toxic air as the sky began to darken with ash. The real test of survival was about to begin. The ground trembled constantly now, and David moved with purpose across terrain that seemed designed to kill. Dr. Hallis struggled to keep up, his environmental suit making every step awkward. Bree was having the worst time, her lighter build making the rough ground even more treacherous. There's a rhythm to it, David called back, not even breathing hard. Step where the rock is darker. That's more stable. Avoid the yellow patches, that sulfur buildup, and it's slippery. Pell was managing better than the others, his multiple legs giving him stability. How far to the cave? 2 more kilometers, David replied, vaulting over a crack in the ground that was venting steam. We'll make it if we keep moving. Behind them, the horizon had turned into a wall of orange and black. The volcanic eruption was building, throwing debris into the already poisonous sky. Ash began to fall like dark snow and the temperature was rising fast. Suit power at 50%, Oren announced, his voice strained. The heat is draining our batteries faster than calculated. David glanced back. We need to move faster then. Can you run? Not in these suits, Hallis admitted. Then we'll have to make it work another way. David stopped at a ridge and pointed down. See that ravine? It's going to fill with gas in about 5 minutes, but if we go through now, it cuts our distance in half. Gas means no visibility, Pell said. Trust me, David said simply. I've done this before. They descended into the ravine, and within moments, yellow gas began seeping from the ground. It rose around them like fog, and Hallis's suit sensors went crazy with warnings. The gas was a mixture of compounds that would have been instantly lethal to any of them without protection. David walked ahead, one hand trailing along the ravine wall. Count your steps. 43 forward, then sharp left. Another 20, then right. The exit is a natural arch. How can you navigate through this? Bree asked, her voice shaky. Practice, David said. Also, the gas has a smell. You probably can't detect it through your suits, but it tells me which direction the vents are. They followed his directions exactly. 43 steps, left turn, 20 steps, right turn. The arch appeared out of the gas like a mouth, and they stumbled through it onto clearer ground. That was incredible, Hallis said, his respect for this human growing. That was necessary, David corrected. Survival isn't about being impressive. It's about being practical. They climbed out of the ravine, and David suddenly held up a hand. Everyone froze. He knelt down, examining something on the ground. Hallis moved closer and saw tracks, large ones pressed into the volcanic soil. What made those? Oren asked. The reason I stick to certain areas, David said quietly. This planet isn't as dead as you think. There are things that live here. Things that evolved here. Impossible, Bree breathed. The surveys showed no life signs. Your surveys look for carbon-based life, David said, standing up. These things are silicon-based. Different chemistry entirely. The scanners missed them. Pell's weapons came up. How dangerous? Very, David admitted. But they're also territorial and predictable. As long as we keep moving toward the cave, we should be fine. They don't usually hunt during eruptions. Usually, Hallis repeated. Nothing's certain in survival, David said, and kept walking. They made better time on the flatter ground, and the cave entrance appeared after another 15 minutes of hard travel. It was a wide opening in a cliff face, dark and uninviting. David led them inside without hesitation. The temperature dropped immediately, and the sound of the eruption became muffled. David pulled out a small light from his pack and activated it. The cave extended deep into the rock with multiple chambers branching off. This is where you've been living? Oren asked. One of my places, David said. I rotate between 3 shelters depending on the weather and seismic activity. Learned pretty quick that staying in one spot is a bad idea here. He led them to a larger chamber where supplies were neatly organized. Water containers, dried food, tools made from salvaged equipment, and even a makeshift medical kit. Everything had the look of careful preparation. How long until we can leave? Bree asked, sitting down heavily. Her suit display showed power at 40%. 3 days minimum, David said. The eruption will peak in about 8 hours, then take 2 days to settle enough for safe travel. The atmosphere will be even worse for a while after. Our suits won't last 3 days, Hallis said, doing quick calculations. Even with minimal power usage, we'll run out in maybe 30 hours. David was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I was afraid of that. There's a solution, but you're not going to like it. What solution? Pell demanded. Gradual exposure, David said. Your bodies can adapt just like mine did. It won't be fast and it won't be comfortable, but it's possible. That's insane, Oren said immediately. The exposure would kill us. So will running out of suit power, David countered. Look, I'm not saying strip down and breathe deep. I'm saying controlled exposure. Small amounts with monitoring. Your bodies are tougher than you think. Dr. Hallis studied the human. David wasn't joking or being reckless. He was presenting a survival strategy based on 8 months of personal experience. What's the process? Hallis asked. We start with Bree, David said. She's got the least suit power left, so she needs to adapt fastest. Short exposures, maybe 30 seconds at first. Let her body start learning to handle the toxins. Increase gradually based on how she responds. This could kill her, Oren said. Staying in that suit will definitely kill her, David replied. At least this gives her a chance. Bree stood up, her feathers shaking slightly. I'll do it. You don't have to, Hallis started. Yes, I do, Bree interrupted. David survived the impossible because he had no choice. Now I have no choice. If he can adapt, maybe I can too. David smiled at her. That's the spirit. Evolution doesn't ask permission, it just happens when it has to. He began setting up a monitoring area, explaining the process in simple terms. Remove helmet for 30 seconds, breathe the toxic air, put helmet back on. Wait 15 minutes. Monitor vital signs. Repeat with slightly longer exposure if stable. Your bodies already have some adaptive capability, David explained. Every living thing does. We're just going to push that capability faster than normal. It'll hurt and it'll be scary, but I'll be here the whole time. Hallis watched the human prepare for what seemed like an impossible task. David Cole was a cargo technician who had become a survival expert through necessity. Now he was going to try to teach aliens to breathe poison. One question, Hallis said.
Why are you so willing to help us?
You could let us die and take our shuttle to escape. David looked at him with genuine surprise. Because you came down here to help me. Besides, survival is better when you're not alone. Outside, the eruption roared to its peak. Inside the cave, a human prepared to teach aliens how to live in hell. Bree's hands trembled as she reached for her helmet seals. Dr. Hallis had monitoring equipment ready, borrowed from their suits, and rigged to track her vital signs. Pell stood nearby with medical supplies, though everyone knew they would be useless if this went wrong. Oren watched from the side, his face showing clear disapproval but saying nothing. Remember, David said calmly, kneeling beside Bree. Your body knows how to protect itself. We're just teaching it to work faster. When I say put the helmet back, you do it immediately. Understand? Bree nodded, her beak clicking nervously. 30 seconds. 30 seconds, David confirmed. Ready? She broke the seal and lifted the helmet. The toxic air rushed into her lungs, and her eyes went wide with shock. Her whole body seized. Feathers standing on end as every instinct screamed danger. David counted slowly and clearly. 10 seconds. You're doing great. 20 seconds. Keep breathing. 25. Almost there. 30. Helmet on. Bree slammed the helmet back down, gasping. Her vital signs on the monitor were chaotic. Heart rate spiking, oxygen levels dropping, cellular stress indicators flashing red. But after 2 minutes, things started to stabilize. How do you feel? Hallis asked. Like I swallowed fire, Bree managed. Everything burns. That's normal, David assured her. That's your body recognizing the threat and starting to respond. The pain means you're alive. They waited 15 minutes, watching the monitors carefully. Bree's signs returned to almost normal, though her breathing was still labored. David offered her water from his supplies, carefully filtered and processed. Again? Bree asked. Again, David confirmed. They repeated the process. This time, 35 seconds, then 40. Each exposure, Bree's initial shock was slightly less severe. Her recovery was fractionally faster. The monitors showed her cellular response adapting, creating new enzyme pathways to process the toxins. This is remarkable, Hallis said, recording everything. Her biology is actually changing in real time. That's what bodies do when they have to, David said. They find a way or they die. Most of the time, they find a way. After 6 exposures, over 3 hours, Bree was managing 2-minute exposures with relatively stable vital signs. She looked exhausted, her feathers drooping, but there was determination in her large eyes. How long until you could breathe it permanently? Pell asked David. Took me about 48 hours of torture before I could function, David said, but I went from 0 to full exposure with no choice. With this gradual method, maybe 4 or 5 days to basic function. We don't have 5 days, Oren pointed out. The suits will fail in 30 hours. Then we start the rest of you now, David said. Pell, you're next. Your species evolved on a frozen moon with minimal atmosphere, right? Your lung capacity is already efficient. This might actually be easier for you. Pell approached without hesitation. His crustacean heritage meant he had multiple redundant systems for processing oxygen and toxins. His first exposure went better than Bree's, though his carapace changed color from stress. While they worked through the exposure cycles, David talked about survival philosophy. He spoke simply, in terms everyone could understand. Every species in the galaxy came from somewhere hard, he said. Your ancestors survived impossible things just to exist. You've got that survival code in your cells. We're just reminding your body what it already knows. Oren finally approached. This goes against everything I was taught about safety protocols. Safety protocols assume you have options, David said gently. When you don't have options, you have adaptation. Ready? Oren removed his helmet for the first exposure and immediately regretted it. His amphibious biology reacted violently to the dry, toxic air. His skin began to dry out instantly and his breathing passages seized. David got the helmet back on at 20 seconds instead of 30. That won't work, Oren gasped. My species needs moisture. David thought for a moment, then grabbed one of his water containers. Next exposure, we're going to spray you with water first. It's acidic, but less acidic than the air. It might help. They tried again, with David misting Oren's skin before exposure. It helped, but not enough. Oren could only manage 10-second exposures without severe distress. Different species, different challenges, David said. We'll work with what you've got. Shorter exposures, more frequent intervals. Dr. Hallis went last. His insectoid biology was perhaps the most fragile of the group, with thin chitinous plates that the acidic air immediately began to erode. His first exposure lasted only 15 seconds before David called it. This is going to take time, Hallis admitted. Time I'm not sure we have. Then we get creative, David said. He looked at his supplies, thinking. Pell and Bree are adapting fastest. We focus resources on getting them functional first. They can help me maintain the others until everyone's ready. The next 24 hours became a cycle of exposure, recovery, monitoring, and adjustment. The cave echoed with the sounds of labored breathing and occasional distress, but nobody quit. Even Oren, who had opposed the plan initially, pushed through each exposure with determination. David rotated between team members, coaching them through the pain, adjusting exposure times based on response, and sharing stories of human survival throughout history. He talked about desert nomads and Arctic explorers, about people who had adapted to high altitudes and deep mines, about humanity's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. We're not special, he told them during one rest period. We're just too dumb to know when something is impossible, so we try anyway, and sometimes it works. After 30 hours, Bree achieved a milestone. She removed her helmet and breathed the toxic air for 10 full minutes with only moderate distress. Her feathers had taken on a slightly darker color and her respiratory rate was elevated, but she was functioning. How do you feel? David asked. Alive, Bree said, her voice rough but steady. I feel alive. Pell reached the same milestone an hour later. His carapace had thickened slightly, and his eyes had developed a protective film, but he was mobile and coherent. Oren and Hallis were progressing slower, but they were progressing. The monitors showed their bodies fighting to adapt, creating new biological pathways to survive. 3 more days until the eruption settles, David said, checking the cave entrance. But we're going to make it, all of us. Then the cave shook, not from volcanic activity, but from something else. Something heavy moving outside. David's expression changed immediately, becoming alert and tense. What was that? Hallis asked. David moved to his supplies and pulled out a makeshift weapon, a piece of metal shaped into a spear. Remember those silicon-based life forms I mentioned? I think they found us. The sound came again, closer this time, a scraping noise like rock, grinding against rock, and a low-frequency vibration that they felt in their bones more than heard. Everyone stay calm, David said quietly, and whatever happens, stay behind me. Something massive blocked the cave entrance, and 2 glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, eyes that burned with intelligence and hunger. The creature that filled the cave entrance was like nothing Dr. Hallis had ever seen in 40 years of xenobiology. It stood 4 meters tall with a body that seemed to be made of living crystal. Sharp edges caught David's light and threw fractured reflections across the cave walls. Where skin should have been, there was translucent silicon compounds that glowed faintly from within. The eyes were the worst part, multifaceted and burning with an intelligence that was clearly evaluating them as prey. Nobody move, David whispered, his makeshift spear held low and non-threatening. They hunt by movement and heat first. The creature's head swept back and forth, those terrible eyes studying each of them. A sound came from it, a grinding vibration like tectonic plates shifting. Then it opened what might have been a mouth and greenish liquid dripped out, hitting the cave floor with a hiss. The stone where it landed began to smoke. Concentrated acid, Pell said very quietly. Stronger than the rain. David took a slow step forward, placing himself between the team and the creature. I've seen 3 of these before. They're territorial, not mindless. This is probably the alpha of the local group. How did it find us? Oren asked, his voice shaking slightly. Thermal signature, David said. Your suits are putting out heat. To this thing, you're like bonfires in its territory. The creature moved closer, its crystalline legs clicking against stone. Each step sent small vibrations through the ground. Up close, they could see that its body was covered in sharp protrusions, natural weapons that could tear through metal as easily as flesh. Hallis activated his scanner quietly. The readings were extraordinary. The creature was indeed silicon-based, with a completely different biochemistry than anything in the galactic database. It breathed sulfur dioxide, metabolized volcanic minerals, and its internal temperature was hot enough to melt most metals. It's magnificent, Hallis breathed. It's also deciding if we're food, David said. Everyone slowly moved toward the back chamber. Keep your movements smooth. They began to retreat carefully. The creature tracked them with its burning eyes but didn't advance. It seemed curious more than aggressive, tilting its head in a gesture that was almost recognizable across species barriers. Then Bree stumbled. Her still adapting body was weaker than usual, and her foot caught on uneven stone. She fell with a cry, her suit clanking against the cave floor. The creature's attention snapped to her instantly. Its mouth opened wider, and more of that burning acid began to pool. David moved without thinking, stepping directly between Bree and the creature, his spear raised. No, David said firmly. She's not prey. The creature paused. Its eyes focused on David with sudden intensity. The grinding sound came again, but different this time, almost like a question. David slowly lowered his spear but didn't drop it. I know this is your territory. I've been here for months and I've respected your boundaries. These are with me. They're under my protection. David, it can't understand you, Oren hissed. Maybe not my words, David said, not taking his eyes off the creature, but it understands intent. The creature leaned closer to David, its crystalline face just inches from his. That terrible mouth opened, and for a moment Hallis was certain he was about to watch a human die. Instead, the creature exhaled, a cloud of sulfur dioxide that would have killed most species instantly. David stood in the cloud, breathing it in, and didn't flinch. His eyes watered slightly and his skin reddened, but he held his ground. The creature pulled back, that grinding sound coming again. This time it sounded different. Surprised, maybe? Or impressed? You're testing him, Dr. Hallis realized. You're seeing if he's a true survivor of this world. The creature's attention shifted from David to the rest of the team. It moved toward them again, but slower now, more deliberate. Pell raised his weapon, but David shook his head sharply. Don't. If you shoot, we're all dead. There's more of them outside. As if to confirm his words, other shapes appeared at the cave entrance. 3 more of the crystalline creatures, smaller than the alpha, but still deadly. They were surrounded. What do we do? Bree asked, fear clear in her voice. David looked at the creatures, then at his team, and made a decision. He reached up and touched his own throat, where the acidic air had burned it months ago. Then he pointed at the cave entrance and the toxic world beyond. Finally, he pointed at the alpha creature and made a gesture of respect, a slight bow. The alpha watched this strange communication. Then, deliberately, it stepped aside from the cave entrance, not leaving but making space. It's giving us a chance to leave, David said. It's saying this is its home, not ours. We can't go out there, Oren protested. The eruption is still active, and our shuttle is on the other side of their territory. David stood still, thinking. Then he did something that seemed completely insane. He walked directly up to the alpha creature and placed his hand on its crystalline surface. The heat radiating from it was intense enough that Hallis could feel it from meters away. The creature could have killed David instantly. Instead, it made that grinding sound again, softer this time. 8 months ago, I crashed on your world, David said quietly to the creature. I didn't mean to invade. I was just trying to survive. You let me live because I adapted, because I became part of this place. These people are trying to do the same thing. They're learning to breathe your air, to survive your world. Give them the same chance you gave me. The alpha creature studied David for a long moment. Then it looked at Bree, who had removed her helmet and was breathing the toxic air with difficulty but determination. It looked at Pell, whose carapace had thickened to handle the environment. It even studied Oren and Hallis, who were struggling but still trying. The grinding sound came again, and this time the other creatures responded with similar vibrations. They were communicating, Hallis realized. Actually talking to each other. The alpha creature moved away from David and turned toward the cave entrance. The other creatures followed. But before leaving entirely, the alpha paused and looked back. It made a specific sound, then tapped the ground 3 times with one crystalline leg. What did that mean? Pell asked. David was quiet for a moment. I think it said we can stay, but only in this cave. The rest is their territory and we have to respect it. You can't possibly know that, Oren said. No, David admitted, but I've been watching them for 8 months. They mark territory by tapping. 3 taps means this area. It's the same pattern I've seen them use before. The creatures moved away from the cave entrance, disappearing into the toxic landscape. The team was left alone again, but everything had changed. We just negotiated with life that we didn't even know existed, Dr. Hallis said in wonder. Life that evolved on a death world we thought was barren. The galaxy is full of survivors, David said. They just survive in different ways. These creatures are as adapted to this world as I'm becoming. We can't judge life by our own standards. Bree sat down heavily, her breathing labored but steady. How long until we can reach the shuttle? 2 more days until the eruption settles, David said. By then, hopefully you'll all be adapted enough to make the journey. And maybe, if we're respectful, those creatures will let us pass through their territory. And if they don't? Pell asked. David looked at his spear, then at the cave entrance where impossible life had just shown them unexpected mercy. Then we figure something else out. That's what survivors do. Outside, the toxic world continued its violent existence, but inside the cave, 2 different kinds of survivors had found a way to coexist, at least for now. 3 days after the volcanic eruption began, Dr. Hallis stood at the cave entrance without his helmet and breathed the toxic air of CR 7719. It burned going down, made his respiratory system work overtime, and his chitinous plates had developed a darker, tougher coating to resist the acid. But he was breathing. He was alive. And against every scientific prediction, his body had adapted. Beside him, Bree stretched her wings. Her feathers had changed, becoming denser and more resistant to the caustic environment. She could manage 30-minute exposures now without significant distress. Her lungs had developed new structures to process the high oxygen content and filter out the worst toxins. Pell was already outside the cave, his crustacean body having adapted fastest of all. His carapace was noticeably thicker, and he had developed additional filtering systems in his respiratory passages. He moved across the sharp terrain with confidence now, no longer needing the full protection of his suit. Only Oren still relied heavily on his environmental suit, though even he could manage short exposures. His amphibious biology fought the dry, acidic air more than the others, but he had adapted enough to survive in emergencies. David stood with them, looking out at the landscape he had called home for 9 months. The volcanic eruption had settled, leaving the already hostile world coated in fresh ash and new minerals. Steam vented from 1,000 cracks in the earth. The orange sky looked the same as always, beautiful in its own terrible way. Ready to try for the shuttle? David asked. Dr. Hallis checked their supplies. They had salvaged equipment from the suits, created breathing filters from materials David had collected, and prepared for a journey through territory claimed by the silicon-based creatures. Everything they had learned about survival on this world would be tested. The creatures, Bree said, her voice nervous. Will they let us pass? Only one way to find out, David said. He picked up a piece of volcanic rock and tapped it 3 times against the cave wall. The sound echoed out across the landscape. They waited. After several minutes, the grinding vibration sound came back from somewhere in the distance. 3 distinct pulses. They acknowledged, David said with satisfaction. That's a good sign. They began walking toward the shuttle's location. The journey that would have been impossible to them just days ago was now merely difficult. They picked their way across sharp rocks, avoided venting gas fissures, and waded through pools of acidic water that David had mapped in his months of exploration. After an hour of travel, they saw the first creature. It was one of the smaller ones, about 3 meters tall, watching them from a ridge. Its crystalline body caught the orange light and scattered it like a prism. David stopped and tapped his makeshift walking stick 3 times against a rock. The creature responded with its own grinding vibration, then moved away, Not fleeing, but giving them space. They're escorting us, Pell realized, making sure we leave their territory. More creatures appeared as they walked, always at a distance, always watching. The Alpha appeared once, massive and imposing, studying them with those multifaceted, burning eyes. David raised one hand in acknowledgement, and the Alpha creature made its grinding sound before disappearing behind a formation of volcanic rock. Mutual respect between species, Dr. Hallis said, recording everything. Both sides acknowledging the other's right to exist. This will change how we understand territorial behavior. The shuttle came into view, half buried in ash but intact. The creatures had not damaged it, Hallis noted. They had simply observed this foreign object in their territory and left it alone. As the team approached the shuttle, the creatures began to withdraw. The Alpha appeared one final time, making a complex series of grinding sounds that might have been farewell or warning or both. David tapped his stick 3 times against the ground in response. Then carefully he bowed slightly toward the creature, the same gesture of respect he had shown in the cave. The Alpha creature seemed to consider this, then turned and walked away, its crystalline body catching the light until it disappeared into the harsh landscape. "They just let us go," Oren said in amazement. "We proved we could survive here," David said. "That makes us part of this world, at least temporarily. They respect survivors." Getting the shuttle operational took several hours. The ash had to be cleared, systems checked, and power restored. Bree and Pell worked mostly without suits now, their adapted bodies handling the environment well enough for heavy labor. Even Hallis managed the work with only partial suit protection. When the shuttle was ready, they faced the final decision. "David," Dr. Hallis said carefully, "your body has adapted to this extreme environment. Leaving might reverse those adaptations. The shock could be dangerous." David had thought about this during the long nights in the cave. He looked at the world that had tried to kill him, and then taught him to survive. Part of him wanted to stay, to continue learning from this impossible place. But he looked at his team, aliens who had trusted him completely and knew his choice was already made. "We do this together," David said. "You risked your lives to investigate a crashed pod. You trusted a human's crazy survival plan. If there's danger in leaving, we face it the same way we faced everything else here." They sealed the shuttle and began the ascent through CR-7719's toxic atmosphere. The ride was rough, but the shuttle held together. David was strapped into the medical bay with monitors tracking every biological system. As they broke through the upper atmosphere, David's body began to react. His heart rate spiked, his breathing became labored, and his temperature fluctuated wildly. Hallis administered stabilizers while Bree held David's hand through the observation window, her eyes filled with worry. "Your body is trying to readapt to lower oxygen levels," Hallis explained. "It's confused about which environment to optimize for." "How long until we reach the station?" David managed to ask. 4 hours, Oren said from the pilot position. "Can you hold on?" David thought about everything he had survived. 48 hours of agony when he first crashed. Volcanic eruptions, acid rain, hostile alien predators, starvation and thirst and isolation. 4 hours was nothing compared to that. "I've been through worse," David said and managed a weak smile. 3 hours later, they docked with the research station. David's condition had stabilized, his body finding a new balance between its adaptations and the different environment. He was alive, changed but alive. The station's medical team was shocked by his readings. Shocked by the entire team's readings, actually. Bree's respiratory system showed permanent changes. Pell's carapace structure had fundamentally altered. Even Oren and Hallis showed biological modifications that should have taken generations to develop. "What happened down there?" the head of station medical asked. Dr. Hallis looked at David, who was sitting up now, already looking better. "We learned that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about being willing to adapt." The report that Dr. Hallis filed would change xenobiology forever. The discovery of silicon-based life on CR-7719 led to the planet being classified as a protected ecosystem. The data on rapid biological adaptation opened new fields of research. The footage of the creatures changed how the galaxy understood life itself. But more than the science, the story spread. The story of a human cargo technician who survived on a death world for 9 months. The story of alien scientists who learned to breathe poison because they had to. The story of 2 completely different forms of life learning to respect each other. David Cole became an instructor, teaching survival philosophy to exploration teams across the galaxy. Not tactics or techniques, but mindset. The stubborn refusal to accept defeat, the willingness to try the impossible, the importance of adaptation and respect. 6 months later, David returned to CR 7719 with a proper research team and diplomatic authorization. They observed the silicon-based creatures from a safe distance, documenting their society and ecosystem. The creatures seemed to remember David, greeting him with their grinding sounds when he tapped 3 times on the rocks. Standing on that toxic world again, breathing its poison air with only minimal protection needed thanks to his maintained adaptations, David realized something important. He had not conquered CR 7719. He had joined it. He had become part of its ecosystem, another survivor in a world full of survivors. "What are you thinking?" Bree asked, landing beside him. She visited often now, her own adaptations maintained through controlled exposure. "I'm thinking that life finds a way," David said, watching the creatures move across their territory, no matter how impossible it seems. Whether it's silicon or carbon, human or alien, life keeps pushing forward. That's not special. That's just what life does. The toxic wind blew across the volcanic landscape, carrying ash and acid and the promise of another eruption someday. But it also carried the proof that nothing was truly impossible, that barriers were just challenges waiting for someone stubborn enough to overcome them. David Cole had crashed on a death world and learned to thrive. But more than that, he had helped others learn that they were stronger than they thought. That adaptation was written into the code of all living things, and that respect between survivors transcended the barriers of species and chemistry. The galaxy was full of impossible places, and now it knew that life, in all its stubborn, adaptable, relentless forms, would find a way to exist in every one of them. All it took was the courage to try.